Alright everyone, welcome back to another video. Last time we left off with the new immigration, talking about a lot of the immigration coming to the United States around the early 1900s and um, a bit of the people that went into it. People that came to America, and it was a very picture-filled time. We're now on to the Spanish War. Small wars often have great effects. The McKinley administration had been elected on purely domestic issues, but ex-President Cleveland warned McKinley that the Cuban question was likely to become acute. It had long been a sore spot to the United States. Even before the Civil War, the South had viewed Cuba with covetous eyes as a possible future slave state. The Cubans themselves were dissatisfied, and in a 10 Years' War, 1868 to 1878, kept up a native rebellion. American sympathies were involved, and a few American volunteers engaged in the conflict. War broke out again in 1890s. Congress was bent on war, and McKinley yielded. Spain was of herding the people into concentration camps. Interventionist newspapers vying for circulation kept the excitement at fever heat. The climax was reached when the American battleship the Maine was blown up in the harbor of Havana. An American committee of investigation showed that the explosion had some external cause, but no one knows for certain whether this was a Spanish torpedo or an accidental collision with a mine. A great cry arose, "Remember the Maine!" Congress was not bent on. Oh, wait, what? I just was about to read that all over. Oh yeah, no, I was reading that right. Look at that. Congress was not bent on war, and McKinley yielded. Spain was ordered out of Cuba, and when it delayed, war followed. Commodore George Dewey was ordered to send the Asiatic fleet to the Spanish Philippines. He smashed the Spanish fleet in Manila Bay. Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines all fell into American hands. Independently of the war, the United States annexed the Hawaiian Islands on their own petition. Bryan, although still clinging to free silver, said that imperialism was the paramount issue. He advocated immediate independence for the Philippines. McKinley thought the Filipinos, unready for independence, as the United States had done with the Mexican War, it paid a sum for the annexed islands. The Americans evacuated Cuba and made Puerto Rico and Hawaii territories, but kept the Philippines in a temporary colonial status. The American public was happily expansionist, and McKinley was duly elected in 1900. There was a temporary boom for George Dewey, now an admiral, for president, but it came to nothing. The only real crisis in the 1900 election was the selection of Theodore Roosevelt for vice president. He had served with a cavalry regiment of Rough Riders and had been elected governor of New York. Western sentiment insisted on his nomination, and Boss Platt of New York favored it because Roosevelt was too independent of party discipline in the state. Mark Hanna dreaded it. "Now it is up to you to live," he told McKinley. I think that is all for the reading. But, yeah. So the Spanish-American War is typically what it's called. A lot of times in this book they mention it just as the Spanish War, which, I mean, it's not technically wrong, but a little unexplained, really. But definitely an interesting war. The Maine, of course, like they said, there was some evidence of an external factor, but nobody really knows what it was. A lot of theories point to it was probably just a boiler explosion inside the ship that actually caused this, but we'll never know. But at this point, does it really matter? Not really. Um, Over 100 years ago, it would have mattered. Not so much now. But yeah, it is a much more America kind of wanting colonial interests. Hawaii didn't really have anything to do with the war, but I guess I just had to mention it here, huh? But Puerto Rico, still an American territory today. It's had calls for statehood a few times. Nothing really has ever come of it. Maybe someday that'll change. That'd be interesting, nonetheless. But yeah, the Spanish War, though, very interesting war in that it kind of just gets forgotten about a lot of times. It is kind of seen as a small war, but the United States gets quite a bit out of it. Gets technically Cuba, they got out of it. It was given away as more of like a hey, it's a protectorate or a friend or whichever. Um, but we got Puerto Rico, we get the Philippines. You know, it's a pretty big deal. The Philippines will eventually be freed. Actually, interestingly enough, the idea was for them to get their freedom basically right before the United States had joined World War II. It was a plan like, hey, we're gonna, make you guys independent, and that was a whole thing. But then the Japanese attack, and then conquer the Philippines. The United States comes back, and then it's not until a little bit later that the Philippines get its independence. But yeah, it's a little interesting time there. But very, very interesting. But now we'll get into the pictures. Above is the battleship the Maine. The battleship Maine was destroyed in Havana Harbor on the 15th of February, 1898, with a heavy loss of life. The Maine had been sent to Cuba in January 1980, or 1898. I'm so used to 1900s, 1898, to protect American citizens and interests in the area. The United States believed that Spain was responsible for the sabotage. Yeah, is there any proof? Not really. Actually, there's probably more proof that it wasn't the Spanish, but eh. Below is Admiral George Dewey, the hero of Manila Bay. Would have been interesting if we had an admiral as president. That's not very common. I'm trying to think. I don't think we've ever had an admiral as president. Someone have to correct me if I'm wrong, but it would have been interesting nonetheless. At the right here is the Great White Fleet steaming into San Francisco Harbor in 1908. Yeah, the American fleet. This is a very interesting time because this is where you'll have battleships, dreadnoughts. I don't know if actually dreadnoughts would have been here, but battleships, a few other ships of decent size. Um, Really interesting time period for ship combat. Um, One that kind of gets forgotten about because not a lot of things happen during this time. This is one of those things, but a lot of other things, yeah, just kind of small. You have a few wars, but they kind of get forgotten about. And the great mix of the very much impending Great War. At the bottom right is the American troops guarding insurgent prisoners in Havana. Yeah, not everyone was necessarily all too jazzed on American interventionism. Let's just go with that. At the left here is Theodore Teddy Roosevelt with some of his troops after the battle at San Juan in 1898. Roosevelt, who had resigned his post as an assistant secretary of the Navy to accept a commission as an Army lieutenant colonel, formed his Rough Riders, a regiment of cowboy cavalry recruited principally from Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and the Indian Territory. On July the 1st, 1898, they took part in a famous action to take the San Juan Heights, a fortified ridge near Santiago. They took Kettle Hill, a height separate from the main ridge. Almost overnight, Roosevelt became a national hero. Yeah, Theodore Roosevelt will become president. It's kind of funny that they ended this with saying, "Oh, to McKinley, you have to live." Roosevelt becomes kind of a problem for many people in power. So one way to shut him up, especially in New York, they were very much annoyed with him. But one way to shut him up was to put him as vice president, because the vice president, especially at this time, you didn't really have much power. The vice president didn't really have much to do. They didn't really have much to say. Couldn't really do very much. Now, the vice president has all these negatives, except for one thing, one major thing. In the case that the president dies, the vice president becomes a very important person. And, that's never going to happen, right? Who knows? At the right here, Hawaii seemed to be an ideal spot for mid-Pacific base following Dewey's triumph at Manila Bay. Congress passed an annexation bill and a ceremony was held in Honolulu celebrating the annexation. Uh, a lot of Native Hawaiians at the time probably didn't want this as much. There's a lot of immigrants to Hawaii that did, of course. Not to say no Native Hawaiians wanted this. Um, there were some that did, quite a few. Only because obviously there are certain benefits that come with annexation. Um, I know a lot of times now we look at colonization as very bad, and there are many cases where it is very bad. But sometimes it is also a thing that some countries would want, only because as themselves they cannot necessarily defend themselves. So having a bigger nation, for instance, like in this example, the United States, becoming part of that, it gives them a certain deal of protections that they maybe wouldn't have had before. Not to say that is necessarily what happens with Hawaii. It's a little bit more complicated than that, of course. But there are instances where that does happen. Just putting that out there. Below is California and Idaho troops campaigning in a churchyard at San Pedro, uh, Mokoti, after the Spanish-American War in 1899. Yeah, this war will have a profound effect on Spain, especially. Um, Spain really has fallen on very hard times by this point. They still have an empire before this war. By the end of it, it's basically gone. Um, Anything that was really Spanish empire-y is taken away from them. They still have, I believe they still had some stuff, but not as much. And Spain obviously has fallen from its former glories, um, especially with the early days of the Spanish Empire in South America and things like that, which it's one of the largest empires in all of human history. Um, but it doesn't last very long, and for reasons like this. And Spain was never able to really hold these, like for instance, like the British could have, or did, I should say. But that is going to do it for this video. If you guys liked the video, leave a like. If you have any ways I can improve on these videos, comment down below. I just appreciate your feedback. And as always, subscribe. It really does help out the channel. Thank you.